You're listening to Unlocking Vulnerability, a podcast produced by Helen Pettifer, helping you better understand consumer vulnerability. Hello, I'm Helen Pettifer, and welcome to Unlocking Vulnerability. In this episode, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my special guest, Martyn James. Hello, Martyn.
Hello, Helen. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome. So Martyn is an award-winning public relations expert with 2 decades of experience of working with the media. He's also a money and consumer rights specialist and a regular commentator on television and radio. He's currently the headline money expert of the year, as voted for by the nation's leading journalists. So thank you again, Martyn, for joining us. So over to you, Martyn. Do you want to just provide a brief introduction to yourself, sort of expand on what I've just shared there?
Oh, I'd love to, Helen, and thank you once again. So I fell into customer relations like many people do when I first moved to London back in 1999. And from there on onwards, I realised that this was something that I was really passionate about. So I started working with big organisations and helping them develop their own customer service skills. And then I moved into PR. And for many years, I was the chief spokesman and head of media for the Financial Ombudsman Service. So I know how things work behind the scenes as well. I've also done frontline. In one of my hardest jobs, I took phone calls for the head of one of the biggest banks in the UK for about 2.5 years. And that was 7 hours a day of dealing with very, very angry people at the highest level in an organisation. So I really do understand what it's like to be on the front end, as well as talking about, the hypotheticals as well, and how businesses can improve things.
Brilliant. So a lot of wide variety then, and a lot of experience that you've had. So fantastic. So obviously we're smack bang in the middle of COVID-19, and we had Boris's announcement last night, which was interesting. I'm not sure if we're going to cover that today, but not sure where to start with that. So, but obviously in the light of coronavirus, consumer vulnerability has significantly shifted and intensified. What changes have you seen over the last 2 months?
Well, there are some positives and some negatives, as you might expect, given this pretty unique set of circumstances. In terms of positives, I think that what this has done is it's forced the UK as a whole to acknowledge that a considerable chunk of the population does classify as extremely vulnerable. There's 1.5 million people shielding, and estimates up to, between 5 and 8 million people who may have fall into vulnerability categories, or you have better stats than I do. I think what this has forced people to do is to acknowledge that these people are within our society. Some of them, they're your family, they're your neighbours, they're your friends, and they're dealing with things on a daily basis that most of us don't think about. And all of a sudden, when we're all asked to do something like lock ourselves away and follow certain rules, I think it's really brought home to many people just what other people's lives can involve and the complexities of it. My sister and my lovely niece, she has a life-limiting condition. She's 6, bless her, and she's absolutely fantastic, and I love her to bits. So my sister's shielding, but she's been doing this, 24-hour care for quite a period of time, and it never fails to astound me how complex and hard what it is that she does is and what it means. So I have a huge amount of respect for not only for people who may have additional requirements in their day-to-day lives, but carers, key workers. And I think, again, we've all seen how very, very much reliant we are on those key workers who keep us going. So loads and loads of positives there. On the downside, whenever a situation like this happens, businesses can't always be prepared for every eventuality. It's obvious that there are flaws in some of the existing planning. In fact, in many cases, there's not been any planning for a flu pandemic. And let's be honest, this was something that was eminently predictable. The insurance industry actually discussed the possibility of this happening back in the early 2000s as their chief threat to their financial stability. And what was done? Well, not very much. This has been around for a while. I'm particularly concerned about the erosion of customer service, about the steady removal of telephone helplines, availability and accessibility of telephone numbers so that you can even get hold of an organisation, the rise of chatbots to stop people dealing with people directly, and to automate systems, and increasingly in the last 18 months, the removal of email addresses. So firms are actually going back to the 19th century and asking you to write a letter in if you are particularly unhappy. Who would have thought this, you know?
I know.
Suddenly we all know the price of stamps these days because we have to write letters. All of this has meant that it's very difficult to contact some businesses. And as soon as, you know, the strain goes on them, helplines collapse, it's impossible to get hold of organisations. And we shouldn't be seeing a situation where big businesses are saying we can't do customer relations for 3 or 4 weeks, which is what's happened. I mean, that's extraordinary. Again, I'd like to try and keep it positive. I would hope that this will remind both people and certainly the businesses that are reliant on them that any erosion of customer service is not only a negative thing for the business, it will absolutely destroy your brand ultimately if you feel that this is the right avenue to go down. People now want to know they can communicate directly with a business.
Yes, and we've just been talking as well, sort of prior to this, you know, sort of talking about that human level, and actually now how we need to engage with people, especially our customers, on that human level, and just pick up the phone and have that conversation with them. It would seriously make a real difference to the customer and the organisation. Obviously, you do a huge amount of research and you've got some real good sort of insights. What are the major financial challenges facing individuals today?
Well, it's been an interesting time, Helen, and you and I have spoken about some of the impacts on individuals. I think the whole thing that really fascinated me about your research and the work that you do is the different categories of vulnerability and things that people don't necessarily think of as being vulnerable. And one of those is financial difficulties. It's, you know, at any given time, up to a third of people could be facing significant financial difficulties, and that's going to go a lot higher. It's what's really extraordinary is the number of people who have just been getting by. And I, for many years as well, living in the capital and not having very much money, I only really became solvent enough to live by myself and, you know, to do all of this a couple of years ago, despite what I do for a living. Many, many more people are struggling to make ends meet and are sometimes only one single pay packet away from going under and not being able to meet their obligations. Again, that problem was there before. Now, the situation as it stands now, with furloughing and some of the government schemes that have been introduced to help during the lockdown, whilst that's certainly positive, what it has done is it's moved the problem slightly further down the line. And as those schemes are slowly withdrawn, and they will be withdrawn, then people are going to start to encounter problems. It will also be difficult because nobody can promise if your employer is still going to be in business. So it's a difficult time for freelancers, for small businesses, for anyone who's worked within a large organisation. And that results in a huge amount of emotional stress. And certainly I'm hearing lots from people who are struggling with anxiety or concerns about, you know, what the future will hold. To a certain degree, we're all in it together. And as a society, we have to make sure that large numbers of us don't fall through the gaps.
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, many of us are struggling, and it's not just with things that are obviously financial, like our credit card bills and a mortgage or rent payments. There are other things as well. You know, we're all at home at the moment in many ways. Everyone's going to be in for a bit of a surprise when their energy bills start to come through.
Yes, yes, and water bills from washing our hands and washing the clothes and
it's that thing. Staying in it. You know, there's that wonderful old story about, you know, whenever there used to be something like a cup final or the Eurovision topically or an episode of EastEnders, and the National Grid would say there'd be a rush on during the ad break when everyone went to put the kettle on. Well, imagine that kettle is permanently on around homes around the land at the moment. Now, this is traditionally the period where energy consumption reduces, so those expensive bits that you build up during the winter reduce during the summer months, and in theory, and we know in practice this isn't always the case, it doesn't work out. Now, I'm fairly sure that many of us aren't rushing to give out meter readings at any particular time. We have other concerns at the moment, but it does mean that people are going to get hit with bills further down the line that are going to be very difficult for them to afford. And businesses need to have a plan on how to deal with that effectively, and one that doesn't involve getting the debt collectors in.
Yeah, exactly. And also, as I had another guest on my podcast episode, and she was saying that a lot of clients made sort of knee-jerk decisions right at the very beginning, were touching their pensions, their savings, and were sort of really withdrawing a lot of their money to see them through. But of course, that then causes issues further down the line once sort of everything is sort of coming back to a sense of norm. But they then have more financial problems further down the line because they didn't really foresee how it would impact them. Are you seeing that as well, that people are making knee-jerk?
Yeah, and I think there is a generational gap when it comes to finances as well. And the lots of the older people I speak to are a little bit resentful about being criticised for triple lot pensions and all of the things that they work so incredibly hard for all of these years. But then also as well, you only have to turn on the television to see kind of countless equity release adverts, and in many ways it's almost as if we started to view old people as free money, and there's a huge guilt obligation on older people to release kind of money that's in their biggest investment, their home. But what happens if you need care home costs? There are lots and lots of other things about society. There is a knock-on effect. So if younger people can't afford to get flats or can't afford to get jobs, that doesn't mean it's a responsibility for the older generation to fund that, and vice versa. And again, the other downside is there's lots of fraudsters. Yes. So we're seeing an awful lot of scams that target older people. In the last few weeks alone, I've spoken to people about land banking scams, which is when they tell you to invest in offshore land that's going to be developed and it's never true. Boiler room scams where they phone you up and hit you with investments, and pension redemption scams which is against the law, by the way, where you're cold called and you're told that your pension's not making enough money and you can move it into all of these things. I've seen people who've lost everything. So these are difficult times, and it's hard to know who to trust or what the right thing is to do. And I think this is one of the reasons why your podcast is so helpful, and the advice that we do. And I have to say, I'm very pleased that you've agreed to be one of my experts of the week this week, Helen. Yes. Because it gives the opportunity to get out information to people in simple, straightforward terms that we can all understand, that makes it accessible for everybody. And even the complicated things in life, there are ways to explain them in ways that aren't difficult. So it's about helping people find that information.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Which actually leads on really nicely to sort of what I was going to ask next is that we've heard on the news about some of the financial support available from the government and financial organisations. How easy is it for people to find this support? How can they access it and obtain the funds to actually help them through this challenging time?
Gosh, that was a really good segue, wasn't it? I liked
it.
Perfect. Well done. So in simple terms, it's not that easy. And funnily enough, when I'm doing these things or researching articles, yes, I do know what to type into a search drive. And, I find it quite hard to get through to, the sites and the information that I need. It's very easy to click on the wrong thing online as well. If I'm finding it hard, then everyone will be struggling more or less. And you really can't take this kind of thing for granted. So when lockdown first began and issues started arising, the Universal Credit Helpline had about 2 million people attempt to get in touch with them at any given time. And during that week, it was the third most asked question I had. First was about furloughing and self-employment, but the third question was, how on earth do I get information about universal credit? Now, if you know where to go to the gov.uk site, or you know what to type in or what you're looking for, it might seem obvious, but it really isn't. If you're, and those government websites, nicely as possible, are not always the most user-friendly things. You have to have lots of passwords. It's really, I'm not even going anywhere near HMRC. That's a whole different thing. So it's not always the case. And actually, sometimes even things that are positive. For example, there was a smaller business grant scheme which allowed businesses to apply through their local council for grants of up to £10,000. This is so useful, but not many people knew about it. It wasn't very well promoted, and you have to go to your own council website to find information. So I spent an awful lot of time on social media looking it up for people, because it was quicker for me to do it than it was to explain it. And ultimately, it's not through a lack of good intentions. That really is out there. Unfortunately, It's bureaucracies function as bureaucracies, and simplicity is what people need. Any business or organisation, I would say, I'm always a little bit wary when they tell me how accessible and wonderful their websites are, because in my experience, if you can't find something within one click, it's not clear enough.
No, fair. Yes, exactly. And I think as well, the people who may be accessing universal credit and these small grants are people that have probably never done it before. So actually they have that then the inexperience of having to do that, as well as that emotional fear and their pride as well. It's almost as well, their pride can sort of take a blow as well, that actually I can't provide for my family anymore, so I'm having to rely on, you know, outside sources to help me put food on the table and pay the bills. So it's a real challenge.
I think one of the urban myths that kind of perseveres, there's a little bit of truth in it, but it really does persevere is the fact that if you're unemployed, then it makes sense to sign on to universal credit so you've got a continuation of your national insurance payments. It's not exactly the case, if truth be told. But what that story does is it gives people some freedom to go, I'm not unemployed, I'm not seeking universal credit, I'm doing it so that I have this. And do you know what? There's nothing wrong with an urban myth like that if it makes it easier for you to do it. And there is some truth in it, you know, there is some aspects of it, but it is a really, really difficult thing to admit that's the case. Many people who haven't, you know, signed on since they left college or school or university, will be amazed to find that the world is a very, very different place these days, and there isn't a housing benefit in the traditional sense, which is what lots of people are searching for, because it's part of universal credit. And, you know, the way the payments are worked out is ludicrously complicated. I often say to people, don't even look at it. Just be honest about your circumstances, explain what the deal is, and they'll figure it out for you. And if they've cocked it up, then, you know, great, you'll get some money in the, you know, ultimately in time. But it is really, really difficult, and, you know, with all the stigma and everything else that's attached, it's difficult. But again, I would say to people, millions of people are struggling at the moment. Millions of people are in the same boat as you, trying to navigate this whole system. You are not alone, so please don't give up.
No, exactly. And it's great that there is that financial support out there.
Absolutely.
For people when they can find it. So again, then sort of coming on then to the individuals, and when it comes to financial management, I know there's plenty of tools out there. So you've got, you know, I've seen budget planners, budget calculators. So putting the onus back onto the individuals, what can they do to help themselves fully understand their current financial situation and identify where changes can be made?
So this is such a good question, and I'm a great believer in a bit of pop psychology when it comes to all of this kind of stuff. I don't know about you, Helen, but I'm a terrible prevaricator. And there are times when I'll be washing up and, you know, cleaning shelves that haven't been cleaned since 1857, just because I'm desperately trying to avoid doing something. This is what we feel like when it comes down to budgeting. This is, it is one of those whole things like writing your CV. It's one of those awful skills that everyone hates and nobody's any good at it, and it's always a bit of a nightmare. There are lots and lots of wonderful apps, as you rightly say, out there, but they can also be a means to prevarication in the process. So you download the app, and then you're like, I need to learn how it works. I've not got time to do that now, so I'll do that later. Or, my phone's playing, I've got a phone call. Or there are lots and lots of reasons why we as human beings can come up with reasons to avoid doing this. I often say to people, to the amusement of my friends and family, no end, look, do whatever it takes, you know, make yourself a cup of tea, or, you know, grab yourself a beer or a glass of wine, it doesn't matter, and set yourself aside 20 minutes to half an hour and just say, I'm going to do it at this time, and face it down. By all means, you know, use some of the apps out there, but you can't go wrong with a basic spreadsheet, or even better, a pen and a piece of paper. And you just need a few bullet points. You don't need it to be really, really complicated. Go onto your online accounts. If you've not signed up for online accounts, I really, really strongly recommend that you do it. It is secure, no matter what you hear. Yes, mistakes do happen, but it just means that you can keep on top of your finances. You'll be able to get a list of your direct debits and standing orders through your bank, and that will tell you precisely how much money you've got coming in and how much money you've got going out. this is the scary part. That's the part where you have to go, right, can I afford this? If you can't afford it, there are organisations that can help you deal with your creditors. Step Change is the free debt charity. They're very busy at the moment.
Yes, I can imagine.
They're there to help you. And there's the money advice service with free tips. There's loads of things. I've got a whole set of tips on how you can claim money back for things, for example. There'll be loads of things that you're paying for that you don't need to pay for, or that's duplicated. So actually going through your bank statements and your credit card statements can actually be a bit of a gold mine once you start cancelling that gadget insurance policy that you've not used since 2007. There are lots of little nuggets in there, so you'll be surprised. You'll be able to save a lot of money. You can switch to other providers of services and again save a fortune there as well. But ultimately, at least you know, money in, money out, what you've got left over. And if you can't cope with it, there's a solution for that. And that's where the free debt charities come in. There are paid for organisations that will do things like debt management. Do not use them. I'm not saying that they're not legitimate. They are regulated. They do exist. But why pay more money for something that you can get for free? So don't feel pushed into paying someone to manage your debts for you. And don't feel that you have to do something drastic like file for bankruptcy or get an IVA. I'm really annoyed, actually, that I'm seeing these advertised all over Instagram at the moment and other things. It's not an easy way out of debt. There are easier ways. So don't panic and seek help. And if you feel a bit lost, then have a look on, go on, obviously check out your sites, check out Resolver. We've got free guidance on there as well on how to find the organisations that will help you.
Brilliant, that's great. And I think the first step is to just sort of acknowledge that you're not going to like what you find before you start that research, because I think probably a lot of people put it off because they're thinking, I know I'm spending more than I should be, but actually ignorance is bliss.
Absolutely, I could not agree more. I often say, and I say this to businesses as well, because businesses have exactly the same mentality. Saying something out loud makes it true.
Yes.
And so we avoid doing it just because it's then you have to deal with it. And this is, what I sometimes go into and speak to businesses about, what's going wrong there. And there's a real reluctance to ask awkward questions because, of course, that makes it true as soon as someone said it out loud. So everyone does it. It's perfectly natural. But sometimes you have to make it true in order to resolve the problem. Yes,
absolutely. So moving on then, I mean, we've been seeing on the news and through social media stories of companies that are really stepping up and adapting their practices and processes in order to really make a difference to their clients. What companies have you been particularly impressed with?
This is such a good question because it's not just companies, there are also sectors as well that sometimes get things right. And, so to give you an individual example, I was very impressed by Admiral Insurance, who recognised that the public were rather angry about the fact that they were paying extra for insurance in other areas, but nothing was happening with the car that sat on the driveway that they can't drive. And they did a very simple thing. It won't have been too expensive for them. They gave every one of their customers a £25 refund.
Yes, I got my £25.
Did you? Oh, right. And
lovely surprise.
Isn't it lovely though? Because now, if we're being a bit cynical, for most people, that's probably not even half of the month's payment. Okay, but what it does say is the business has before you even had to complain, it's recognising that you're in a difficult position, and any business giving away some of its profits is frankly quite extraordinary. But it also sends a message to the rest of the industry, which is look at what could happen in this utopia where we actually all pull together and do these things. Now, I've often been critical of many sectors over the years because that's part of my job is to highlight when things are working. But, when organisations do speak together with one voice, then it's really helpful. And the energy sector, for example, when lockdown happened, immediately through Ofgem, the regulator, they all made a commitment, the big ones, to not seek collections through using debt collection agencies, to suspend any problems with cutting off people, to help people who were on prepaid meters because they couldn't get to the shops. And they basically came out with a list of commitments. Now, of course, there is a lot that's wrong in that industry that needs to change. But that's the kind of dramatic let's tell people in straightforward terms what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. Time and time again, Helen, when I speak to people, and I know you must encounter this as well, I say to people, what's the number one thing you'd like from businesses? You always get this kind of exasperated that precedes this, but it's basically people say, I just want them to be straight up honest with me about what I'm dealing with.
Yes.
And actually, that is the clue. And I think with supermarkets, for example, there was a whole thing where it looked like some supermarkets were listening about vulnerability and making those slots available. But then, unfortunately, they went off message, and it's all kind of backfired a little bit. And that was a bit of an open goal for the supermarkets, because I did say to them, look, why not be brave and all make a statement saying to all of our customers, if you are not on the extremely vulnerable list, we would appreciate it if you did not book online. Help us help the people who need it the most. Wouldn't have that been lovely? It would have encouraged us all to do what we have to do. Yes, and then you wouldn't have had people desperately trying to book online slots to 2 minutes to midnight and just basically ruining the whole system. Unfortunately, they waited for government guidance. That was a little unclear about going to the supermarkets or not. These are big businesses. They could have made that decision. And I felt that a trick was missed a little bit there. So there are lots of positives, but, unfortunately, businesses do have a way of reverting back to their old ways. So I'm keeping an eye out on how things are developing.
Brilliant. Oh, well, keep me posted on future trends. So moving forward then, so sort of moving on from what you've just said then, what should organisations be doing to better support, not just their customers, but also as well their staff?
Well, businesses have been given a very clear wake-up call. That's actually the staff that they often don't pay the most attention to, i.e. the ones on the front line, the ones dealing with people face-to-face, the ones on the telephone lines, the ones answering complaints and correspondence. They are the ones who were essential when all of this happened, while everyone else kind of sat at home. I also think it's extraordinary that, that people in call centres are working from home.
Yeah.
And imagine that. Imagine being shouted at, from people who are very frustrated and upset. And at least at work, you can walk away afterwards, or you can pop out with your mates and have a drink and vent a little. If it's in your own house, it's like you're allowing a lot of angry people in. And that has a huge psychological impact on people. I would argue that now this is the time for businesses to acknowledge the huge contribution and the absolute how essential their frontline staff are, to invest more in them. Again, to use the example of the supermarkets, whilst it's great that, Tesco's and Sainsbury's announced 10,000 jobs and everything, that was to get people through the doors selling stuff. But there's no one there to take it back. There's no one to deal with the follow-up, with returns, to answer the phone calls. If you can get staff up front to flog stuff, then you can invest the same, if not more amount of staff to deal with the situation when things go wrong. And that's very clearly where businesses across all sectors are encountering problems. So a huge investment in customer service needs to take place, and a real recognition of the incredibly hard and incredibly challenging job that people are doing. I hope it also means that we take a root and branch approach to looking at customer service and about what it means. Is it healthy for people to spend 7 hours on the phone? Are we moving towards a culture where we do maybe 2 hours on and then 5 hours answering written inquiries? Or, how do we help people at the end of the day to de-stress? Anyone who spent any time answering telephone calls will know that there will be certain customers who will get under your skin, and they just have a way of saying something to you, and you can't let it go. Even if you're, tough as nails, there will be one every 3 months or so who'll get to you. And this builds up over time as well. So yes. What support are we offering to people to help them unwind and get all of this out of their head so they can go home and get on with their lives? Because these staff are the ones who make organisations.
Yeah, and I totally and utterly agree with that, because the conversations I'm having with new clients and potential clients at the moment is all around resilience training for their staff. Because also as well, not only are the staff taking these phone calls from customers who are experiencing challenging situations, but also as well, we don't know what those employees are actually dealing with within their own lives. They may be taking on caring roles, they may be having to homeschool their children, they may be in an environment that isn't conducive to a working frame of mind. So it's sort of giving them the support and the tools that they need to be able to to carry on that job. But I love the idea of actually 2 hours on the telephone and then some hours off. I think that would be really beneficial and a lot more productive for staff.
Absolutely. It also encourages people to broaden their skills.
Yes.
And so people are, natural. I'm a talker, so I managed to find a job that allows me to talk for a living. But but I'm also dyslexic. So for me, I didn't feel that when I was growing up, so I could go for any jobs that involved me using my brain and writing stuff because I couldn't spell it right. And you get all of the technology to help, but it's such a varied condition. I fall into the severely dyslexic category, funnily enough. So a lot of the tools didn't work for me, and I just thought, oh, well, I'll never be. I can't do written customer relations because I'm not good at. I can't do the numerical, data analysis because every time I type something into a calculator, I come up with a different figure. But you can. There are ways to do that, and there are ways that you can cope and learn with support. And it just broadens you out. It means that you're not locked into one type of job because you don't think that you can be better. And I think it would be really, really helpful for people to be able to diversify in what they're doing as well. Help learn new skills if you want to, obviously. Be ambitious if you need to be. If you want to plateau and stay where you are for the rest of your career, why not?
Yes.
All of these things are valid and worthwhile.
Yes, and I think that is some of the challenges that the organisations are facing now because they've furloughed some of the staff. And then, of course, now they're redeploying teams from different departments who are now answering the telephone or having those customer conversations. And they haven't been skilled, they haven't been trained, they're not confident to actually have those customer conversations because it's not their daily job.
Absolutely, and I was really struck by something that you've done in the article you've written for Resolver, Helen, when you're talking about the scripts that people have to work with, and we need to move away from that script-based way of dealing with things. Teach staff what the rules are and how they work in practice, because my job is all about shades of grey. I know what the rules are. I know what the regulations are around your holiday and whether you can have a refund and about how an investment should be sold to you and all of these things. But things come up and I'm not sure what the answer is because the world changes and there's always something around the corner that you're not expecting. So that constantly evolves. If you just teach someone what to say by rote and don't let them diversify from that, then they are going to feel attacked or under pressure when somebody inevitably asks them a question that's off script. Yes. Whereas, spending just a little bit more time explaining why you're doing what you're doing and why you're saying what you're saying. And it really doesn't take very much longer at all. It gives people the freedom to think, is that fair? It also means that your staff and your employees can they will raise the questions that you probably need to be answering. So I always say to the people I'm working with, what is it that makes you uncomfortable about this? So this is what the rules are. This is what's being said in by the government. This is what's being said in the press. What's making you think, hold on, I'm not entirely sure about that. That's what we need to know about because those are the questions that you should be answering because that's what the public is asking.
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. That's great. I'm obviously conscious. We could sit and talk about this for hours, couldn't we? So, obviously we need to bring this episode to a close now. So are there any final thoughts that you want to share with our listeners today?
I would say, Helen, that I really do understand that this is a very scary time for people, and myself included. And I think we are all having moments where we're walking around and feeling a bit lost. The vast majority of us have had a little cry for no reason whatsoever. We've all felt very, very isolated, and no one really knows what society we're going to emerge into. And unfortunately, I can't promise people what that's going to look like because there are many potential outcomes here. So we are all going to have to adapt a little bit to what the future holds, but that doesn't mean that it's all going to go wrong. I would just say to people, it is a new world that we're going to emerge blinking into, but you are not alone. There are countless people in the same boat. You're not all going to be allowed to sink. That's not going to happen. There will have to be a plan to deal with lots of things. But if you're worried about anything, the sooner you speak up or the sooner you acknowledge that there might be a problem, the sooner you can get it resolved out. And just the psychological benefit of being able to say, I saw this coming at me down the line, but now I'm prepared for it. Therein lies the solution. And there is a solution to everything. Even the worst stuff at the moment, there are options and help and support that are available to you. So don't suffer in silence, speak up.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Martyn. And thank you so much for...
You always going to ramble on. I'm so sorry. Look at that.
Not at all. It's absolutely fantastic. I just think, we could talk for hours. So thank you so much for being my guest today, Martyn. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on and sharing all your insights and your thoughts and sort of your research as well. So thank you once again for joining us. Please take care of yourself. Stay safe. Stay well. Remember to subscribe to my podcast and leave a review. And you can also follow me on Twitter at @HPettiferTrain. And I look forward to you joining me on my next episode.